this twice as thick because this is two-sided. This is one-sided.
Oh, okay.
Jim? Call him on that number.
Okay.
We might pass the conference call now.
Roger.
Did you want an extra?
Charlie,
Hey Charlie, it's Michael Esparza in the city of Alice. We're at our council meeting that we had scheduled. And we got you on speakerphone, so we're ready for you.
oh, okay, is this is a council meeting? I thought I was just doing a,
No, I'm good.
No, yeah, it's our council meeting.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to get some insight as to expectations for the next meeting, what y'all want to see. I have my notes from our previous meeting, that talked about some of the things we had previously discussed and what city council had sort of touched on. And so I want to get a feel for what you want to see before you when I come back. Do you want to see some actual language consistent with some of the things we had previously talked about? Do you want to adjust that? Are there other things that you'd like to see? What exactly are your expectations for purposes of the next meeting?
Guys?
I think the first thing I'd like to ask is, wasn't it Mr. Dan that came down? Dan came down and visited with us on the 21st of January? Was it Dan?
Rick.
Rick, I'm sorry, yeah. When Rick came down and spoke to us, Charles, we left the session and had given him some like priorities that we wanted to address. Were those relayed back to you?
No, he may have. Let me show you what I have, and let me read to you what I have in my notes, and can we see if that's consistent with that?
Well, and we are sitting with the paper in front of us too, so let's see if that's what we're looking at. So go ahead, please.
Okay, and I may have an email somewhere, actually, that I can pull up. But here's what I have in my notes from our previous meeting. 4-year terms to include an extra council member with staggered terms. A prohibition on running if you've been recalled, if a council member's been recalled. A 2-year sit-out after someone has held 2 consecutive terms, and to hold no more than 4 terms total in a lifetime. A change to the percentage necessary for referendum and recall to be, so that we have a consistent number across elections. Adopt the budget pursuant to, change the charter so that you're required to adopt the budget pursuant to state law, and then delete the public recreation board from the charter.
I think we had a couple of things on that. You know, some of those items, if I'm not mistaken, were because we were looking hard at the idea of a 4-year term. And,
Right.
and that's what would, you know, the 4 terms would have been.
4-year staggered term though.
Yeah, 4-year stagger term if we went.
Stagger terms, that's
if
right,
we
I
had
have
went
that.
that route. And that's what would have pushed the 4 terms, because then it would have been 16 years, yada, yada, yada. But,
Sure.
and then the removal of the board was actually in order for us to move it to a standard ordinance, so, because it has 5-year terms and be able to manage it without having to make charter change.
Sure.
That was the purpose of that one, not just
So,
removal of it. But I think
Charlie-
some of those take a low priority.
He doesn't have, I don't guess you have the updated sheet that shows what each council member had requested.
No, I don't think that I have
Who
that.
put this one together?
Can we email that?
Yeah, he should have it. Let me get
Can
my
we
phone.
email that to you and you access it so that,
Yeah,
because
let me,
it's pretty
I'll just check my
clear.
emails to make sure that it's, you know, it's not been emailed to me and I didn't catch it.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the things that we left with, Charlie, some of the, initially, of course, is getting rid of the Deadwood language and other legally unnecessary things.
Of course.
And that's
Yes.
of course there.
Which I think that's, all of us agree on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think that probably falls under number 1, because, and that's a mass, right? That's one charter, I mean, that's one,
That's one charter.
Valid.
So removing language that's unnecessary, so all that removal would be under one proposition. And then removing any items that are inconsistent with state law would be another one. So there would be a lot of changes under just those two, but it would just be two propositions on the ballot.
Correct. Okay.
And when we talk about being unnecessary, let's be clear on this, or against state code, we're actually talking about stuff that is either outdated.
It's redundant.
It's redundant in the state code, or it's just outdated. We're not actually talking about stuff that we're necessarily choosing to have removed. It's stuff that doesn't even apply any longer, correct?
Right, and I usually refer to those, so I refer to those types of changes that we've just discussed as non-substantive changes. In other words, we would be removing those from respect to unnecessary provisions. We would be removing those provisions of the charter which are non-substantive and are unnecessary to be in your charter because it's repetitive of state law, because it's repeated somewhere else in your charter, or because it's just not required to be in your charter, and it's a non-substantive issue. And then the other change, which is making certain changes to your charter to be consistent with state law, those are also what I consider to be non-substantive, because you have to comply with state law anyway.
First.
So you're not, while there may be a change, an actual substantive change to your charter, say, for example, you've got a charter provision that says you have to hold a recall election within 90 days of the petition being filed. Well, you can't do that unless within 90 days a uniform election date uniform election date falls within that 90 days. So even though that is a quote-unquote substantive change to your charter, it's not in the sense that you couldn't do it because state law would not allow you to do it.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So that for sure is a given. We all would like to see that on the ballot.
And then I would say for clarification, so the workshop, we're gonna have a workshop, and what he just wanna know, what can he bring to the workshop to make that
That's
workshop
right.
easier, yeah. So when we're talking about the general things, we did talk about terms, staggering terms, term limits,
Yes.
and then definitely the quorum, what constitutes a quorum.
Recall.
And then recall.
Recall and removal, so that we
Yeah.
can get that with states, so that we don't have any issues moving forward.
And then I had wanted to add voting for the mayor.
Right.
So as part of and so I would include this, well, we could include it, well, it just depends, and I'll have to look at the charter more. I have it in front of me, but I don't think we need to be going over this right now, but
Right.
just for purposes of my review, as part of adding a council member, we want to give the mayor, we want to see if the citizens want to have the mayor also be a voting member of council.
Correct.
I think that the under last discussion though too is that the idea of adding another council member has been moved away from.
Right, we don't.
I think we set priorities when we had our last session, and it came down to the clarification of what existed, what standing members actually form a quorum.
Okay?
We already said that, Pete.
Well, I know,
What
but
Mike said.
the
Quorum,
recall and
recall.
removal, the federal laws.
You had added the boards, the public rec board to be removed from the charter. Pete?
My recollection from that
It's not on my
conversation
list
is
at
that,
all.
Yeah,
that
Wait,
there was a
is that what they're talking
discussion
about?
about
it's number 7
Suzette,
under
they're
your
talking
name.
about when you weren't here. They're talking about when.
Okay,
when
I'm
Rick-
sorry.
Oh, board dictated in
I
charter.
apologize.
Because Rick came up.
I just sent them this by email.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
what,
wanted to, there was some discussion about whether you wanted to add years to the terms. Mr. Crisp, you
Mhm.
had discussed that you didn't think that would have been necessary, but you still wanted to look into staggering the terms.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to figure out if there's a way to better handle it. We kind of did some research and Charles's information. You sent out no, Miss Odie, you sent out the information of his past research and his documentation that he put out, correct?
Yes, he
Yeah.
gave us that website.
Yeah. And it just showed a lot of different things. So I think that the other thing that we said is we didn't want to overwhelm it either,
Yeah, we did talk about that.
so.
If
Well, we
if
talked
we have
about
a
doing it
general,
too.
So here's the great thing is that if we have a general parameter of what you're looking at, you can tweak it, at this next meeting. Because my hope would be that I get a general understanding of some of the changes that you want to make, and so I can give that to you, and so you'll be able to see exactly what it would look like. In other words, what's been deleted and what's been added, and then how many propositions would be on the ballot that would encompass the changes that you'd like to see on the ballot. And then as you look at it and debate it and discuss it at the meeting, we can tweak it and come back with some final language if you decide, oh, you know what, maybe we do want to add a council member. How would that work if we decided we wanted to do that?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. I think this was compiled with Navarro, the last meeting that we had, and
Okay.
Maybe it failed to reach you. So, but this little sheet that was compiled by, I guess, Miss Odie, put it together. It really makes it very, in layman's terms, what we're looking at, labeled by council member. So,
Okay, I think I'm looking at it now. Okay, so here's what we have. I have under Chris, term limits, quorum, what makes a quorum, can standing members make a quorum, recall, remove. So these are all general questions, but these aren't, this isn't direction for what you want to, what you want to see come before you. And so are we still consistent with these actually questions? These actually look consistent with some of the direction that I got last time that you would be considering.
Okay.
Can we sort of nail that down, and then I can bring you some language, and we can have a fuller discussion on how to tweak that, and if you're comfortable with it at the meeting next week?
yeah, well, I think quorum is kind of redundant. It's both Chris and myself.
And on that,
Terms,
So
Right.
if I came back with something that had 4-year staggered terms, is that something you would want to look at?
yes.
Okay.
Right, council?
Anything else part of terms and staggered terms or council other than a quorum?
I'm sorry, Charles, can you repeat that?
Anything other that you would want to add other than, having 4-year terms that are staggered and making sure we have a definite number for a quorum? Anything else in that area that you'd want to see?
The recall,
Okay, so
So-
the recall, but that's separate. I consider that to be separate. So that
Okay.
would be, make sure that I bring forward a change that makes clear that if you've been recalled, there's a prohibition for running for office if you've been recalled.
And Charles, what I'm going to tell you again is that I think that you're violating protected ballot access.
No, I understand that. No, I get it. It's actually on the ballot in another city right now. I understand your position, and I would defer to you, and council should take your legal guidance since you're the city attorney. So, but it's the fact of the matter is, in the state of Texas, we get to determine what our qualifications are for our local officials. So.
And I got you, and I'm not talking about what local governments are allowed to do in the local government code or based upon Texas.
It's more of a
Constitution. I'm talking
philosophical
about
position.
specific
Totally
case-
get it.
I'm talking
Yep.
about specific federal case authority, and that when you've got an active situation with individuals that have been recalled, what you're doing is what I've been reading is that basically you're just denying the people ballot access because they lost an election, and that pretty much 100% of the time that's prohibited. There are some restrictions you can put on there and whatnot, but again, I tell you that we're going to have a problem with ballot access if it's a complete prohibition. So if you can do short of that.
Yeah, so in other words, so like what we just put on the ballot in another city is that if you have been subject to forfeiture of office, not just recall, actually subject to some sort of forfeiture of office, you are prohibited from running. I think they put a 2-year prohibition on running. In other words, it's a sit-out provision. It's not a prohibition on running. Although honestly, I don't know what the difference is between doing that and having term limits, because term limits does the same thing. I mean, if you run for 4-year terms and then you're prohibited from running for city council again ever, it's the same effect. It's just for a different reason. And term limits has been clearly held to be constitutional.
Correct. On mine, I want to clarify, I had voting rights on recalled member. So we ran into a situation where we had recalled members voting on on setting date for the election of the recall, which got a little fuzzy and was actually just didn't seem correct.
Well, there's some case law out there actually that addresses that, and I don't remember exactly what it says. I can't remember if it says because they're directly interested in the outcome of the election. I think the case law. I'd have to go back and relook at it, but there is case law that addresses it. My general recollection is that the case law says in those circumstances that if you have a direct interest in the outcome of the election, that you can't vote on it. But I could be wrong on that. I just can't remember. I know it's out there. I've dealt with it in 10 years ago or so, something like that.
See, and then that's also where we have an issue too, because if heaven forbid anything comes up like it has in the past, where we have two members that are directly affected by something like this. Now, our standing council is formed of a quorum of 4 plus the mayor, so we have to get 3. If 2 of them have
But
to,
the mayor doesn't vote right now.
if 2 of them have to abstain from voting or step out, which we've seen recently, if they have to step out, now we no longer have a quorum. So we need to figure out.
That's not true. That's not true when someone has an actual conflict of interest under the law.
Okay.
The case law clearly states that if you have an actual conflict of interest under the law, that recusal does not affect the quorum does not affect the quorum.
Just
So we needed to know that.
yeah, because
But it would lower the vote count, right? So I'm just making numbers up. Let's say you've got
They can't
2
vote.
people subject to recall. You've got a 5-member council. So it'll take a vote of 2 of the remaining 3 to vote on the recall. It wouldn't take 3 of the 5. It would only take 2 of the remaining 3.
Charles, and let me extrapolate with our situations. The mayor asked a question of me is that at the time when the recall occurred is that there was some question and the prior city attorney briefed the issue and had determined that they could continue to vote.
Yeah, that may be the outcome. Like I said, I don't
And whether
remember
whether I
law.
agree with that or not, that was his determination, and then
Okay.
so they proceeded, and we actually did not lose our quorum until they were actually recalled, and so that's
Right,
the
yeah.
point that I was trying to make that I'd like to make is that after they were recalled, there was no way that they could be counted as part of the governing body.
That is correct,
Whether
and
they
you
had
would
an
lose your
interest or
quorum
not.
moving
So
forward.
it
That's
wouldn't
right.
have- so it wouldn't have mattered whether they were in the room or whether they had appeared.
That's right.
Once they were recalled, we just failed to have a quorum. So we
That is
just-
correct.
So we
And that's
just
happened
need-
in multiple cities, by
So
the
we
way.
need, we definitely need to deal with that issue so that we never have to do that again. Whatever you would think, some language in regards to the quorum, include the mayor in the quorum.
Well, if the mayor's allowed to vote, then that eliminates that.
well, but also if the mayor's allowed to vote on every instance, it's the only way a tie can be formed when somebody abstains. So,
No, because we have 5 members if the mayor votes, so you won't have a tie.
but if the other day when he stepped out, if it goes 2-2, it's the only way it causes a tie.
But then that's where we change quorum because of that.
And
But it
just-
still went
and
2-2.
You
Conflict
can
of interest.
understand, Charles,
No,
from
because
the
of conflict of
discussion
interest.
that you're hearing,
Still
there's
2-2.
Yeah,
You know,
there's definitely some policy
Yeah.
issues that need to be
And so I'd come up,
fleshed out.
I'd come up with a very simple way to get it done. I'd come up with an alternative that includes the mayor being included in a quorum. I would come up with those different things and give them, 2 or 3 options in those regards so they can consider it.
All right, because there are some significant policy implications dependent on and consequences for doing things to try to ensure you have so for example, let's say you draft it in such a way that if no matter how many people is recalled, you still have a quorum of council to conduct business. Well, let's say 3 council members are recalled. In that case, 2 elected officials will be making all the decisions
Right.
for the entire city. And that would have to be a unanimous vote every time.
Which that wouldn't be, I don't think that would be right.
And so those are just things you have to think about when you're going through this process of, well, we don't ever want to have to be without a quorum to conduct business, so we want to draft it in a way to ensure that doesn't happen. The unintended consequence of that is potentially one person is making the decisions for the city.
Right. So, but like you said earlier, there's a legal statute that says if there's a conflict of interest, then you readjust quorum, right?
That's right.
So
That's when
that-
there's a conflict of interest. But if someone has been recalled, they don't. If someone has been recalled, if you've got a 5-member council and 3 council members are recalled, you're down to a quorum. You're down to 2, and you don't have a quorum to conduct business until the
Right.
next election.
Right.
That is a true statement, and that's happened to me in at least one other city, and I know it's happened in a couple other cities as well.
It does.
He's talking about recall. He's not talking
No,
about
no.
somebody stepping out.
Yeah, I'm not talking about conflicts of interest now. I'm just talking about if someone is actually
Okay,
recalled.
so another one. We have five members. Right now, mayor doesn't vote. And so say we turn it into the mayor votes, or the citizens allow the mayor to vote. Citizens, not council members. And so then we have one person step out. So how would we deal with that because of conflict of interest?
It'd be
So let me throw a hypothetical.
Okay.
You've got 4 council members and a mayor. All council members and the mayor all vote on all matters except where they have a conflict of interest under the law. A quorum to conduct business under state law in those circumstances is 3. Okay, so you could have as many as 2 people have an actual conflict of interest under the law. In other words, they've had to file a conflict of interest disclosure statement and recuse themselves because of ownership in property or a business or something. Okay, those 3 people step out. You have a vote. You have 3 people. You still have a quorum. You have a quorum to conduct business. The vote necessary to adopt anything in those circumstances would be 2 of the remaining 3, because the 2 who have a conflict of interest don't count towards the quorum for purposes of your vote count.
Yeah,
But
Charles.
what if they-
However,
But
if-
Charles,
hold on, let me finish so that you understand get the full picture. However, if those individuals don't have an actual conflict of interest under state law, in other words, they just abstain from voting, they still count towards the quorum for purposes of the vote count, which means you still need 3 of 5 to approve it.
Yeah, I think though the point is this that I was trying to make is when you go to the mayor voting on 5
And you don't
and
want it.
one person steps out for conflict of interest and it goes 2-2, it's the only way to legitimately cause a tie. Where if the mayor doesn't vote and that person steps out, it's 2-1.
That is correct. You could have a tie if one person if you have got a 5-member council and one person has a conflict of interest and there's 4 people voting and it's 2-2, it could be a tie. But that same thing could occur. Could occur even if the mayor doesn't vote, right?
Oh, that's what he just said.
How?
Oh, so the mayor votes in the case of a tie?
Yes.
Okay.
The mayor
So this is
already
what I
has a
tell
vote,
folks-
technically.
This is what I tell folks, just for consideration for discussion. And I've had people come down on both sides of it. But my question is always when people talk about a tie, my question is, what's wrong with a tie? A tie just means it doesn't pass. It fails just like if it didn't get enough votes.
Well, then it's a failure. It's not.
But how many things have you tabled? Same thing.
Well, how many times has the mayor actually had to vote where the council wasn't unified?
Not many, but
At this-
what's the
at this
big
point.
deal for allowing the citizens to decide if they want transparency of the mayor?
Transparency of the mayor is what you do every day when
No.
you speak.
No, it doesn't go on record, Pete Crisp.
Well, I know where I stand
Well,
on
why
that.
don't you let the citizens decide? Why are you so adamant?
Because the mayor's position is.
Oh,
a
here we
position-
go.
Well, no, I mean, we have to be realistic. I mean, when you run for mayor, it describes what your position is. It describes what the council's
In
position is.
the old charter, Mr. Crisp, we're talking about a new charter moving forward.
Yeah, right.
But also, I think that for our purposes today, so for the workshop, that discussion, whether that'll be on the ballot, that's.
That's right.
Yeah, right now, you know, he can bring that back, language to
Right.
show that, and then the pros and cons of that on voting, and so.
And y'all can
he's
have
just
that
trying to-
in-depth discussion.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's
Mhm.
trying to figure out what
So-
to bring to you guys.
So
Yeah,
Charles,
just-
you know, to kind of draw it to a head, I'd say in regards to this is that the mayor has requested that you come up with some language to change our charter to allow the mayor to vote, so they can
Got
consider
it.
it the workshop if you do that. As far as the issue in the limitations to run for once you've been recalled, if you come up with a few options in those regards, I think that's
We'll do it.
good. And
Yes, sir.
so, and actually give them some language, I think that would put those two things to bed. What else would you all have?
Printed press was on there. And that, in our charter, help remind me? Was that because we have to print it in the newspaper?
It was in
When we
regards
have
to the sales or the meetings and
sales,
stuff like that, and we're
which,
talking.
that's kind of outdated, like what happened the other
Tax
day
property
where
sales.
we're setting, okay, so we have this requirement that requires us to print in the newspaper, for one print or 2 days or something like that, when we're gonna, no, for property, like, so like we had.
Planning or
Tax
rezoning or
sales.
something like that.
Okay.
Is there any
Planning,
provision?
zoning.
Wait a second. Our charter our ordinances do not require, and I don't even believe that's in the charter, do not require that we send particular notices and it be published in the paper for plating. That was one of the issues that came up last
Oh, for
time.
plating, no.
Our department has been sending these notices. Basically, it's one of these things, and Charles, I'm sorry to go into this with you on the phone, but
That's okay.
what we ran into the other night is that they are affording more process or more notice than what is required by our own ordinances and charter and the statute itself on these plans.
Oh, okay.
They're sending notices out as if it was a rezoning.
Right.
And in
Oh.
rezoning, the statute very clearly says, we can't take that out. The statute that applies to that state statute very clearly says we have to publish so many days prior to what goes on. And so that's really not an issue that you guys need to try to cover with this. Now, if there's some other issues in regards to posting and whatnot that may
I
deal
think-
with the sale of property.
I think it was also mainly talking about, when y'all brought this up, is, are there any provisions that talk about online publishing instead of on the printed paper? You know, there's a paper, are there any new provisions that deal with that? Charles?
I usually just, when it comes to those sort of publishing requirements, unless you want to be more restrictive, I usually suggest not even addressing those things in your charter because state law is going to address them. And it's just, making sure we're consistent with state law. And I'll often make a change that says, with respect to, Public Information Act requests, you have to comply with state law or, things of that nature, just so that it's still in the charter, people see it, but we're not coming up with anything that might be someday inconsistent or more onerous than what the state law requires.
Okay. So then we don't have to, we can mark that out online, Charles, the printed press, right?
That would probably get taken care of in the first,
With
the
just
first item with.
Yeah, with
the
the,
federal
transit
statute
changes,
and
yeah.
stuff. Okay. So basically, it looks like term limits, which we had talked about term limits, which you stated.
With the 2 years out.
Yeah, I have a 2-year sit-out after 2 consecutive terms with no more than 4 terms total,
Right.
is
Right.
what I have in my notes.
Okay.
Right. And then quorum, which we
Yes.
discussed in detail, because that's very fuzzy for us, Charles, and
Yes.
it doesn't make sense.
Yes, I understand. I'll try to come with some language that can do different things, and I should be able to. I hope that I can explain it to you in English so that it kind of makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. And then, Mr. Crisp, the boards, how did you want him to, or, because
Well-
that is in our charter.
Yeah, so one of the recommendations I made was to look at the removal of boards that are dictated by the charter as opposed to ordinance. I think there's 2, isn't there one in the airport or something? I can't remember off the top of my head.
The Public Recreation Board and.
Was one for sure, and it's just, you end up with a board with very long 5-year terms, and just, we want to be able to continue this board, but we want it to be managed via ordinance so that it doesn't have to go through the charter for any changes that have to move forward. It's just, it's the only, really, I think it's the only board that we even have in the charter that's controlled that way, and that was designed in 1940-something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so-
easy to solve if it's something that you want to put on the ballot. Usually I'll just come up with some language that says the city council has authority to appoint those boards and commissions as it deems advisable to the best interest of the city. Those boards and commissions shall be, the rules and the rules associated with those boards shall be determined by ordinance, and then deleting all the other provisions regarding boards and commissions
And
that are
Charles,
discretionary.
I think the first part is already there. I think you just have to delete the two provisions.
Okay,
to-
all right, yep,
or the-
that'll be fine.
Because all of our other boards are controlled via
And I think it
ordinance.
specifically says that in the charter.
Okay,
Does it
very
state in
good.
the charter the length of terms on the boards?
Yes.
It does state
It
that?
sa- it
Not in
states.
the
see
charter.
that.
In the charter?
Yeah, in the charter, it says serve a 5-year term.
Oh, I didn't see
For that
that.
In-
But it's
in
that- it's that
particular
same board.
On that
Yeah.
board, yeah.
That
So
particular
if we
board, not
remove,
for all of
if
them.
we remove it, then it's not.
And this isn't,
Okay.
and this necessarily isn't something that is new, and this isn't something I'm coming up with. In 2016 or whenever, when I took office and they presented us with that initial charter documentation done by the previous mayor and the I guess the committee that they had at that time, that was one of the first ones on the list also.
Okay, clarification of places, Mr. Crisp, you had that on your list?
It,
I would tell you, and Charles, this is what I'll say, is I'll say we just let a sleeping dog lie, because you had a prior city attorney make the interpretation that they could run for places, even though they had run as a gang, as a group. And then the top top 4 vote getters got council, and then the mayor was the only one that ran head to head. I don't know, about 3 election cycles ago, a prior city's attorney made the interpretation that allowed for places, and so then they started running as places. And we've had no opposition to that I've seen, and I think it's general enough to allow it, unless you all just wanted to specifically put it in there saying, by God, we're running for places.
the only reason that I would even address it and get true clarification is if there was a move to a 4-year term.
Okay.
Well, but we won't know until it's voted on, so you would have to put it in there then.
Yeah.
Because we won't, there's no way of knowing.
Yeah, so that maybe
we all-
we leave it alone and in 2 years or whatever after.
But places
after
would be like county, is that what you're meaning, like?
No, like right now I'm place 1,
Uh-huh.
place 2,
If-
place 3.
just so everybody
place
knows,
4.
if you go
They're
to,
still at large, but they just have places they have to file.
But why was it created like that? Because at one time they did have an area, or no?
No.
No.
It was an interpretation that the city attorney had at the time. Before everybody, everybody ran together for city council spots.
Yeah.
And the top 4 vote getters would get in. And then the city attorney interpreted it from one term to the next to say, it does talk about, I think you mentioned that it talks about the city council member's office and
Office.
individual office. So from one term to the next, there was a creation of just 4 places. Still at large. So if you were
across.
talking about, it would be more like districts or precincts or things like that. That was talked about also.
well, if y'all change to 4-year terms, you have to go to place.
Oh, okay, there you go. And I think that may have been why it came up, maybe that note came up and that's why we said, well, we need to clarify if we do. go to
Because if
4-year.
you go to 4-year terms, you have to win by majority vote, which means you have to run by place, and you have to get a majority of the votes. It's no longer the highest top number of vote getter, it's who gets 50 plus 1.
Okay, that's why it came up then. That's why
Okay.
it came up.
Okay. Okay.
And Charles, just I have a question for you. And so if we do that, we go to 4, we're running to places, we go to the 50 plus 1, then do we fall into a situation where we have a runoff?
Yes, if nobody gets 50% of the vote, you have to hold a runoff.
And that's,
Another election.
mhm.
More money, more time, more everything.
And that's if we move to 4-year.
Right, that's true.
Good competition. Okay, and then you also get rid of, you move to 4-year, you gotta resign to run.
If outside of 12 months, right?
And then, and then also, Charles, if we go to 4 years, it affects our ability to appoint replacements, or no?
It does. You can no longer, you can appoint if there's less, if it's in your charter and there's less than, I want to say, a year and 30 days, I can't remember the exact number in the Constitution, you can choose how you fill it, but if it's over a year or over a year and 30 days, I can't remember which number it is, then you have to hold a special election
Okay.
to fill the vacancy.
And then my question for you, when we're thinking about these before you present them, is how many would you recommend we put on a ballot? Because like I said, we don't necessarily want to overwhelm people, and I've always looked at it as 3 to 5 max when you start addressing a lot of these things. at any given time so that the voters don't necessarily go through and either get overwhelmed or discouraged by that we're trying to sneak stuff by them.
You know your community better than I do, but I can tell you that my experience is it doesn't matter how many propositions you put on the ballot. The people are going to read them. They're going to pay attention to them. And I mean, I've had as many as 30 propositions on a ballot, and the numbers were all over the board, right? Like 25 of them passed overwhelmingly. 4 of them lost by a very narrow margin, and 1 lost by a huge margin. So it's my experience that people read them, they figure them out, they're willing to participate in the process, and the outcome of any particular proposition is not dependent upon how many propositions are on the ballot, but rather dependent upon the citizens' opinion on that particular proposition.
Right.
That's my experience.
I feel the same way, Charles. I think with such an old charter that, citizens want to see changes for
Well,
progress.
from what you're showing me, there will be, there might be a lot of changes, but
Not a lot.
I'm not seeing a lot of propositions based on this conversation. I'm seeing maybe 5 or 6 tops, maybe 7 based on these conversations.
Right. Very good. Ms. Bowen, do you want to add something? Maybe you've had time to.
No, everything that was discussed is what I had on my, the terms, the quorums.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, Mr. Molina, did you want to add?
I'm good. I don't know why there's nothing here for recommendations for us, but I'm in sync with all these, so it's good what it is,
Okay.
just a paper, so. I'm open.
This has been very helpful. Unless y'all have anything else, this is very helpful. It allows me to come forward with some actual concrete changes that y'all can look at and debate and discuss and ask questions on.
Okay, I think, Mr. Chris, do you want to add anything?
No, I think we're good. I look forward to seeing what you get back to us. Now, will we get that a little bit in advance so at least we can chew on it
Yes.
before the day?
Yeah, I'll make sure that you get this in advance. I'll work. I'll work to make sure you get it more than me showing up with it for sure.
I really,
When does the agenda go out?
The agenda goes out on the, what?
it's a Wednesday meeting, so it's supposed to go out.
Does that tomorrow? Does it go out tomorrow?
Thursday, the agenda is posted for the 26th.
Oh, they already posted the agenda for the 26th, but the packets for delivery usually go out about 3 days in advance, so
Today's Thursday, so if I can get it to you by Monday, would that be okay?
I think so.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Yeah, that's plenty of
Okay,
time,
all right,
thank you.
all right.
Hey, Charles, I just have one more question, and it might be way out there, but I'm known to be out there. I like to call it out of the box and a visionary. But have you ever heard of a 2-year staggered term?
It's election every year.
I'm not sure how that would. I'm not sure how that would. I'm not sure how that would work. I mean, clearly with 4-year terms, you're going to have some folks
But
who are
every year we have
2
an
years
election.
who are 2 years apart.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? Mr. Chris was talking.
So are you saying like so that I don't know that I've ever done it. I have to think through it mathematically if it would work. But I guess what you're saying is that someone, you might have 3 people run in 2021 and then 2 people run in 2022. So you have an election every 2 years, essentially.
Right.
And no, that'd be every single year.
No, every 2 years, because
No,
it's staggered.
you would run for election every 2 years, but the city would be holding an election every single year.
Is that correct, Charles?
I have to think through it.
I said if
And I'm
there's an
just-
election,
I'm
if there's an
just-
election
I
in
have to put it-
2020 and you're
I
there
have
for
to put
2
it on
years.
paper in order to be able to think through it.
Okay.
Election 2021, you're there for 2 years.
2 years staggered.
Not necessarily. If you stagger
Yeah,
the
I mean,
terms.
not necessarily. I mean, I think you could set it up so that you don't have an election
If
every
we
2
have-
years. But
let's
I
say-
just don't know how that, I just have to
Yeah,
put it on
explain
paper
this
and
to me.
figure out how it works.
And Charles, all right, if we have 4 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, you have 2 members elected in the first year, right? And then you have 2 members elected, I don't know.
You're talking about
And
4
then
years.
they're up for election again the next year.
But you're
And then
talking
they're up for
4.
election.
Right, if you're talking
If you do
2,
2,
then it's every year. If you
I
do
don't
4,
know.
it's
I
every
don't know,
2 years.
Charles.
Anytime he has to think too hard about it, it's complicated.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, it does it for a living.
If it's
And I don't apologize for making people think.
every 2 years,
no, it's okay.
staggered
Apologize
terms,
for it.
there's an
I mean,
election every single year.
Why do we have to let our brain grow
And then
stagnant?
council will never move because
It's
you're.
just a question that I would like for Charles to give me a legal answer and to
Legally,
see.
yes, you can do it. I've seen it before.
I'm asking Charles, Mr. Crisp, if you can come back with just an answer. I'm just, speaking out loud with thoughts of, just solutions, because if 4 years is gonna create complication staggered, is there a 2-year staggered is my initial question, and then what are the, pros and cons? If
Yes,
you can
ma'am.
bring that to me if it's possible, or if it's even done. I don't even know if it's even done. It's just a question. Because I truly believe in staggered terms, and I hate to see this go by the wayside just because of having to think.
Well, what
higher
you're
level.
considering moving to is not, wouldn't be unique. I mean,
Okay.
there's lots of cities out there with 4-year terms and lots of cities out there with 3-year terms. They're all 3-year and 4-year terms are generally staggered terms. They're not, so it's
Okay.
consistent with how most local governments are run.
Okay. I appreciate it. Okay, council, any other?
No,
Do you want to add 10 more, Mr. Crisp?
damn, I could if you
I
want me to.
I know. Well, right now's the time.
No.
He said we're not, he's seen 30.
He's seen 30, that doesn't mean it's.
Let's keep Alice small, why don't we? Okay, Mr. Charles, thank you so much.
You bet. I'll see y'all next week.
All right.
Right, thank you.
Charles.
Thanks, Charles.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Thank you, Jim.
thanks, Jim.
Shoot.
Okay, agenda item number 4, adjourn and or consider and act upon adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion stands as stated. The time is now 10:56. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, council.
Oh, merch, you said, right?